In the last episode, we talked about what kind of thing Astro is. In this one, we're going to make that concrete. I want to show you what working on an Astro site actually looks like, how it moves from files on your machines to a live website, and what happens when content changes. Here's what we're doing in this video. We're walking through the full life cycle of an Astro site at a very high level, where it starts, how pages get assembled, how the site becomes live, and how updates make their way to visitors. By the end, you should have a clear mental model of the system, enough to recognize what's happening even if you've never used Astro yourself. If you come from WordPress, a lot of this usually feels automatic. You edit content, you save, and the page updates. Astro makes those steps more explicit, and that's useful because once you can see where work happens and when it happens, the trade-offs start to make a lot more sense. So let's walk through the lifecycle from beginning to end. I'm going to start by scaffolding a brand new Astro project using the blog template that ships with Astro by default. This template is useful for a demo because it already includes layouts, pages, content, and a simple structure that reflects a real project. It gives us enough surface area to talk about how Astro thinks without adding complexity. I'm using the standard npm create Astro latest command to generate the project. The important part here isn't the command itself, it's the result. This is the starting point of an Astro site. I'll open it up in VS Code so you can see what we have. These files are the source of truth. The layout files define structure, and the content files hold content. Those two come together later during the build. One important side effect of this approach is visibility. Because the content and the structure are separated, it's easy to inspect, including for accessibility and SEO. The outcomes still depend on how you do design and structure the content, but the system makes those choices much easier to see. At this stage, nothing's live yet. This is all just raw material. Now I'm going to open up a terminal and run the command npm run build. This tells Astro to run the build process, which is where our pages and content actually get assembled. The build process reads the source files from the source directory and the public directory, and it turns them into complete pages and a complete site. Instead of assembling pages when someone visits the site like WordPress does, Astro assembles them earlier during this build step. The results of the build process are put into the dist folder, and these are what actually get published. They're plain HTML files that browsers can load directly. To simulate a web server, I'll run the command npm run preview, and this starts a small web server on my computer so that I can see and interact with the site. Remember, everything before this point existed to produce these files. Now let's talk about deployment. That's where we take those files that we built and make them available on the web. Hosting platforms handle the details, but conceptually it's pretty simple. A visitor requests a file, and the server delivers it. If you plan to push changes to the web server manually, you can even use the same Apache or Nginx servers you use for your WordPress projects. In fact, let's do that one time so you can see how it works with something familiar. I've already built my source files, so all I need to do is connect to my server using SFTP and copy the folder over. And there it is, a live website built from Astro. Now that's great if your content rarely changes, but it gets to be a hassle if you're using this for a blog or another real-world site. So next, I'm going to show you how you can publish your site using Git, then use a server to automatically watch for changes and rebuild the site on demand. For this walkthrough, I'm going to use Cloudflare Pages, which has a very generous free plan and is simple to set up. You don't need to use Cloudflare though. You can do a similar thing with Netlify, Vercel, or a properly configured VPS server running Node.js. To configure my site to work with Cloudflare, we use the command npx astro add Cloudflare. That adds the Cloudflare adapter and a base configuration to our project. You can check the Astro documentation to see exactly what this is doing on the back end. It also shows you the manual process if you would rather do it all by hand or if you want to modify your configuration. Now that we have our project configured, I'm going to publish those files we've been working on to a GitHub repository. This way we can configure Cloudflare to pull the static files from the repository and watch for changes. Keep in mind, we don't have to use GitHub. I'm just showing it because it's what I use and Cloudflare supports only GitHub and GitLab. If we wanted to use a different hosting platform, we could also use Bitbucket, Azure DevOps, or even a self-hosted Git server. In Cloudflare, I head over to the Compute and AI, Workers and Pages page. Then I create a new application. Since I'm using GitHub, I'm going to select it. Then I'll choose the repository we just created. On this next page, we can change the project name and other options. Under build command, you can see that this is the standard build command that we ran earlier when we were building and previewing the site locally. The deploy command uses Wrangler, which is Cloudflare's CLI tool that manages worker projects. When we ran the Astro add Cloudflare command, it automatically created the Wrangler configuration files for us, so we're all set to go. Now we hit deploy and watch some text scroll by on the screen. Once it's done, we're redirected to the project page where we can see some statistics and check out the published site. So far, it looks exactly like it did when we manually copied the files to a PHP-based web server. Now let's make a change and look at how updates happen. I'll switch back to our Cloudflare application and go to the deployments page so we can see things as they happen. I'll make a small update to the main headline on our index.astro file. When I save the file, you can see that nothing happens. That's because our save only happened locally. We need to push those changes to GitHub where Cloudflare is looking for it. I commit the changes to Git, sync the change to GitHub, and we can watch what happens. Within a few seconds, Cloudflare sees the change, pulls the files from GitHub, reruns the build command, and publishes the changes to the internet. No magic involved. It's just doing the same thing we were doing locally when we ran npm run build, only it's doing it on their servers. This is what updating content looks like in practice. At a very high level, we update and save content on our computers. We push the changes to GitHub. Content edit leads to a rebuild. The rebuild creates updated output, and that output becomes the live site. This is a different rhythm from WordPress, and understanding that rhythm is key. Up until this point, everything we've looked at has been built ahead of time. Now I want to show you one more capability Astro supports: hybrid rendering. Hybrid rendering means the same Astro site can include pages that are assembled at different times. Most pages are still built ahead of time and served as files. But specific pages, like search, can be assembled when a request comes in. In this case, the search page isn't pre-generated. It's created on demand based on the search term in the URL. The important thing to notice is that this page lives alongside the rest of the site. It uses the same layouts, the same content, and the same project structure. I'm going to create our search page, search.astro, and paste in the code. The key things to notice are the front matter line that tells Astro that this is not a pre-rendered file, the JavaScript code for the query that looks for a search term in the post title and body, the code in the body of the file that dynamically displays the results, and while I'm here, I'll go ahead and add a link to the site's header. I'm going to run npm run dev to make sure everything's working and show you what we have. As you can see, we now have a search item in the menu, which takes us to a search page. If I search for something like Markdown, I can see the results and I can click them to go to their pages. Now that we know it's working, we'll commit the change to Git and sync them to GitHub. And in a minute or two, Cloudflare will rebuild the project and we'll see the results on the live site. Now let's zoom back out again. This workflow makes responsibilities clear. Source files define intent. Builds assemble pages. Output files become the site. Updates flow through the same path every time. That clarity changes how teams think about updates, ownership, and maintenance. Now that you've seen what this workflow actually looks like, we can ask the practical questions. When does this model make sense for real projects? And when does WordPress continue to be the right choice? And that's where we'll go next. This episode was about seeing the system clearly. Thanks for your time, and I will see you in the next video.